Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to make a comparison between the various dead zones for Resident Evil 4. So I'm going to be re-looking at the PC demo version as well as the release Series X version. I jumped the gun on the previous PC video because the dead zone differs per controller you use. So I used an Xbox controller there, but if you use a PlayStation one, the dead zone is lower. And that dead zone seems to be consistent with the PlayStation one, so that might be the same. So I'll demonstrate that in a bit, but I'm going to go over the PC version with an Xbox controller again. So here we have about 30% mostly circular dead zone for movement, except we had these small corners. And it didn't seem like there was any angular restriction for movement. So if I move the stick over here, I'm moving slightly to the right. If I move it over here, moving slightly to the left, slightly to the right, slightly to the left. For the camera, we had a 26% square dead zone. And 20% around the vertical axis was restricted. So if your stick was anywhere within this blue region, you'd move perfectly horizontally, in this case perfectly right, and you wouldn't see diagonal movement occur until you moved into this green region. There's no restriction around the horizontal axis, so as soon as you pass the axis, it'll flip direction. The acceleration curve was a 4th degree power function, and it wasn't scaled to the acceleration curve. So the dead zone would just crop into it. Once you pass the dead zone, you would land straight on that part for the acceleration curve. 4th degree curve, it starts very slow, so you don't actually lose much speed, but it continues pretty slow until it builds up gradually to your maximum turn rate. Now to demonstrate, switching to PlayStation controller. You can see that movement is only slightly different. It's still a 30% dead zone, circular dead zone, but it has lost the corner spikes, and this is because the overlaying square dead zone has been shrunk, so it's probably just been swallowed up by the circular dead zone, because as you can see, the camera dead zone is now 10%. Acceleration starts very slow. This uses the same 4th degree curve, and this cuts into it at 10%, which is even slower than it was at 26%. So movement right around the dead zone will be probably too small to really notice. But we have the same angular restriction around the vertical axis, so you need to break into these green regions to see diagonal movement, same as with the Xbox controller. Here though, since the dead zone is now smaller than this range, if you move your stick up to say this position, movement starts too slow to notice, but you would be moving perfectly left, and you might be able to notice it if I hold this long enough to see some landmarks shift. But If you move here, you'll be moving perfectly right, and same with this, perfectly left, perfectly right. So this is why this is supposedly consistent with the PlayStation 4 version. So this could be why that version feels the most responsive compared to that, and why the Xbox version, which I'll show again in a little bit, feels the least responsive, because the Xbox version has about 30% dead zone. This is a third of that. But jumping over there, alright, so for the Xbox version, we have about 46% rounded square dead zone for movement. This is about a 30% circular dead zone on top of about 24% axial dead zone. And the axial portion does restrict diagonal movement around the axes, so if your stick is anywhere in this blue region, you'll be moving perfectly in one of four directions. So in this case, forward and back. And you don't see diagonal movement start occurring until you move into these green regions. So here, I'm moving a bit to the right, perfectly back, and I'm going to run into a wall. But perfectly forward, bit to the left, perfectly forward, and a bit to the right. So this axial portion not only restricts quite a bit of diagonal movement, but also makes the general dead zone size considerably larger than the PC versions. For the camera, we have this Lego head shape, and horizontally it's about 30%. Acceleration starts very slow, so this might not be too obvious. But vertically, this is about 40%, and this additional vertical dead zone is because of the additional axial restriction, which is present in the PC versions, but this builds on to the 24% axial dead zones that are present in the Xbox version. So we have these on top of this additional axial restriction. So you can see I can make these body motions, and I'm moving perfectly left right now, perfectly right, and it isn't until I break into these green regions where you start seeing diagonal movement occur. And you can see that the horizontal axis is also restricted. So unlike the PC versions, where as soon as I passed over the axis, it would switch directions, here you have to break out of the axial dead zone before that occurs. So by default, the dead zone for the Xbox Series X version is the largest. The next size is the PC version with an Xbox controller, which is about 26%, and the smallest is the PC version with a PlayStation controller at about 10%, and that may be consistent with the PlayStation version. So the Xbox dead zone is the worst in that, and this has quite a bit of more axial restriction. So this can, of course, make so that large portions of your stick are only outputting four directions. This has obvious effects on your accuracy if you're trying to make adjustments, but you're basically etch-a-sketching your way to make the angular corrections you want. As far as the acceleration curve, this is actually a 3.5 degree curve, and so this is actually a bit more responsive than the PC curves. However, this does scale with the dead zone, so it actually starts slower because of that. So instead of starting at 0 like it would on PC, it starts right at the edge of the dead zone. So ultimately it ends up slower because of that, even though it's a more shallow curve than the fourth degree curve on PC. Uh, so this is what can really make the Deadzone feel even worse than it does already. Even compared to PC, where 26% isn't a huge difference from this Deadzone, this can make the Deadzone feel much larger. And I'll compare or have some overlays on the screen where you can see the acceleration curve and the Deadzones being displayed. So this makes the Xbox version the worst controlling of them. But as I've requested in my previous videos, we need options, and this is actually where the Xbox version would fare the best. If we had options for the dead zones and the acceleration curve, the Xbox version is actually better set up. The acceleration curve is scaled to the dead zone, so if you change the dead zone size, it'll stretch and scale properly, whereas the PC version won't. And while there's this underlying axial dead zones here, there are radial dead zones. So if we got rid of the underlying axial dead zones, the radial dead zones are already here. So if we had options to control them, everything would work or come together nicely. On PC, they would have to reset it up so that the acceleration curve scales with the dead zone and switch to circular dead zones. It could be that there are circular dead zones, being used. We see it for the movement, of course, but the camera could be that the actual dead zone that the acceleration curve is being scaled around is radial, but they're just applying a square dead zone on top of that. So if they, remove that and just use a circular dead zone, that would fix it. Additionally, getting rid of this axial restriction is important because it's unnecessary, but it also adds restriction even if we have options. As you can see with the smaller PC version with the PlayStation controller, we had an 11% dead zone, but all around it was restricted movement. So you could only move for your smallest movements in two directions, essentially. I'm going to do another demonstration of an anti-deadzone again here, just to show that again. So this is the Series X version displayed, and I'm using a script to counter the dead zones in game. So this is what it would look like if we had options to control the dead zones, and at least the radial dead zone and the base axial dead zones were completely removed. So I changed the movement dead zone to a 20% circle, so you can see that's triggering much sooner now. So the size of this is smaller than the PC versions now, but we have the same full diagonal movement now. If we ignore the axial dead zones, you can see that movement is shifting if I wobble around this axis. For the camera, this is what I tried demonstrating in the previous axial or the anti-dead zone, but I didn't draw the restricted region. So I set it to a 5% dead zone. So this looks very similar to the PC version with the PlayStation controller, except with the dead zone here is circular and slightly smaller. Movement starts very slow, of course, so you might not be able to see movements too easily. But the actual restriction here is the same, so if I say moved up here, you might be able to see it a little more easily, that I'm pointing very vertically. But if we look at the cursor for a bit, you can see that's moving perfectly left. So even vertical directions are being suppressed because of this axial restriction, and this is why this should be completely removed. So now having these options, this dead zone option would be really good. This would already make it feel comparable to the PC version with a PlayStation controller. But with the current curves, this is still quite slow, and this may be good for some players, but some players want more responsive curve. And to demonstrate what we did before, with a linear curve, so countering this curve completely, the graph will actually be a little wrong. The countering this curve will change the angular movement a bit, but you can see that now movement starts much faster, and it actually increases linearly till the maximum turn rate. So this would allow, as you can see, I can make much smaller movements and have much larger movements being output. So this would allow players to make adjustments more comfortably. Now the difference between a linear curve and a 3.5 degree curve, as used in this Xbox Series X version, is massive, but having a granular slider would allow players to customize this smoothly. And this is ideally what we should get. Again, options to control the at least the radial dead zones and just remove all the axial dead zones. This would be at base good, but if they want to, add options for the axial dead zones so that players can choose if they want any angular restriction on their own, so it's just not forced on the player. So dead zones for at least the radial dead zones, but also axial if they're not just simply removed. And then a slider for the acceleration curve. That'll fix the Xbox version completely. On PC, we just need fixes for the acceleration curve to scale with the dead zone, as well as the dead zones to be changed to completely circular. So, and if that PC version with the PlayStation controller is the same as the PlayStation version, that should be improved there as well. So that about covers it. Of course, I'm showing the launch version for the Series X, and this hasn't changed from the demo. That's not too surprising. I imagine the fix would take a bit longer, but hopefully we can see this in one of the future updates, and certainly before the support for the game stops. So that about covers it. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a good rest of your day.